Hi, everybody. Welcome to this this webinar, Lunch and Learn webinar on wcag 2.2, what's new in wcag 2.2. So as you know, in October last month, we had a new set of guidelines which have been in draft for quite some time. And this webinar is all about talking about what those changes are and what they mean for us as developers or designers or testers. I'm going to go over the slides quite lightly to begin with, because you might have quite a few questions about the different types of changes to the criteria or the new criteria. So I want to go into those in the right amount of depth. And by that, I mean just, if you've got any questions, I want to answer those questions first. So that we got a collective better understanding of the criteria. So I suppose I step back a little bit now and talk about who we are. So we Dig Inclusion. We're a company that started in 2012. We provide training, consultancy, and audits. Our main body of work is audits. We do lots and lots of audits for different clients, including some of the names that you see here, but this is just a few of our clients that we've been working with. We've worked with quite a few football teams, also some charities, and really our doors are open to working with whoever is in need of accessibility services. So whether that's training, if you need to get your staff up and running, with accessibility. So if you just need better knowledge so that you can deliver it better from a developer or design or testing perspective, then we can deliver that. We can tell you where you currently are with your accessibility services. So if you're a big thing that we find is that people often think that they're much closer to providing accessibility services than they are. And it can be quite an eye-opener to have an audit. So I definitely recommend doing that. And of course, now we're auditing to wcag 2.2. So if you've had a audit that was previously an earlier version of that, then that would be a really good time to get a new audit and find out exactly where you stand with regards to the new criteria. We also offer a software as a service. We call this Hugger, and this is a piece of software that we've developed over the past 4 or 5 years, mainly for internal working purposes. We found that we had a lot of files, lots of Excel spreadsheets, lots of Word documents scattered across different places. It's quite difficult to manage that amount of data. So we decided that we wanted to put all that data in one place. So we created a software service called Hugger that we use to combine the spreadsheet. And so the spreadsheet, just to explain it a little bit further, I suppose, is we use spreadsheets to keep track of where we find inaccessibility issues. And then when we find issues, we like to go into a bit more depth on those, provide screenshots, etc., things that you can't do very easily with just a spreadsheet. So traditionally that was done with Word documents, but now it's all in Hugger. So you can click on one of these cells and you can expand this issue and find out exactly what's gone wrong with that particular piece of content, and you can have a screenshot and a description of that within Hugger, and it can generate the report at the end. It's a very useful accessibility testing framework, and it's free as well. So there's a free version that you can go and use. You just need to go to hugger.app. That's hugr.app, and you can sign up and start using Hugger today if you want to, and let us know what you think about it. We've also got enterprise versions available as well. So if anybody wants to have the benefit of running Hugger on their own servers, then that's possible too. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what's new in wcag 2. The short answer to that is not an awful lot. So that's the good news. So if you're already familiar with wcag, and for those that haven't had any exposure to wcag, wcag is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So people say wcag or wcag or wcag. They're usually referring to this set of guidelines. Now, this set of guidelines has been around for a very long time. 1999 is when version 1 of these guidelines came out. And they were created to give web teams the tools to be able to build and assess content to make sure that it was accessible. And there's been a few iterations over the years. Some point releases, we went from wcag 1 to wcag 2. That was 2010, and then 2.1, and now we're in version 2.2. So with each iteration of these guidelines, there's been some additions, some changes, and the idea is to keep making wcag relevant to the content that we're seeing today. And the guidelines that have been added are doing exactly that, with more rich and more dynamic content that we're seeing on the web. We needed new sets of guidelines to help us test these different pieces of content and make sure that they remain accessible to people with disabilities. So what we've seen in wcag 2.2 is the addition of 9 new criteria. So out of those 9 criteria, 2 of those criteria are the single A standard. So I should probably explain a little bit about what single A, double A, and triple A are. These are priorities for the different types of accessibility criteria. So for example, a single A criteria is something like making sure that you have a text alternative, excuse me, for all of your images. And this is critically important because people who can't see and rely on screen readers, they're going to need to have some software that can read that text and give them an alternative for the image. The AA criteria is still very important, and they, in fact, an essential and a requirement for many different pieces of legislation. So, for example, in the UK, we got the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations, which requires us to have AA conformance. So single A and AA criteria are important from a regulatory perspective. We've got the same in the EU as well. And there's going to be some regulation that applies not just to the public sector, but to the private sector as well. And these will all be based on AA conformance. So it's worth bearing that in mind as we go through these new criteria, or we talk about old criteria, that is single A and AA conformance is required for a whole variety of different legislations. The AAA conformance criteria are things that are it's difficult to say less important, because some of these AAA criteria are very important to those people that need them. But usually there are some workarounds for AAA criteria that you won't get with A or AA. So we've got 2 new single A criteria, 4 new AA criteria, and 3 new AAA criteria. There's also one other change as well. There was the parsing criteria, which is 4.1.1 in wcag 2.0 and 2.1 is obsolete now. So that's been abandoned. There's no longer the requirement for code to meet parsing standards. Parsing is not really a standard, but parsing is essentially making sure that your code is well formed, that you're opening and closing your tags, and making sure you don't have duplicate IDs and things like that. Now, if you are doing things like that within your code, it's going to get picked up anyway, or theoretically it should be, because that's going to cause issues for assistive technologies and for users, and that should get picked up in testing. However, it's probably wise to continue to do that type of testing, even if you're not reporting it, because it can flag up issues with the web page that maybe an assistive technology might not pick up. So it's up to you whether you do or not, because it's not a requirement anymore. But my advice to you would be to just give it a check. It's not difficult to run a parsing check. Can be a bit difficult to interpret sometimes, but run the checks anyway, and just make sure that there's nothing out there that you're missing. So let's get into it then. I've kind of reordered these, the numbering of these, just so that the presentation flows a little bit better. So I've put similar bits of content together. So we're going to go from 3.2.6 and then 3.2.7, and then maybe we'll jump back to 2 point something. And that's just to keep similar criteria together. But this is the first of the single A criteria. And this is about consistent help. Now, there's lots of ways that we can provide help on our web pages. You can see on the screen here, I've got some contact us, which could be links, which could be an email address, or it could be telephone, it could be social media, or it could be an address, a physical address. There are other ways that we can help people through FAQs. We can provide FAQ help through usually on a page on the website that people can get to easily, or more popular these days, or certainly more present these days, are chatbots as well. And these can be another source of help, whether this is automated chatbot help or whether there's a real person on the other side. They're both forms of help. So the requirement here, it's I have to be clear that it's not that you have to have a help feature on your website. So if you don't have one, this criteria won't apply to you. But if you do have a help criteria or some help features, then they need to appear in the same place on each web page that this help applies to. So the criteria actually says that if a web page contains any of the following mechanisms, and those mechanisms are repeated on multiple web pages with a set of web pages, sorry, bear with me a second. I need to shrink my screen. I can't read the whole thing. Okay. Repeated on multiple pages within a set of web pages, they occur in the same order relative to other page content, unless a change is initiated by the user. So this could be human contact details, human contact mechanism, self-help option, a fully automated contact mechanism. So that's kind of describing the different types of help files. But really, this is just about making sure that they occur in the same order relative to other page content. That just really means keeping them in the same place. So if you've got a help feature like contact us, FAQs, or a chatbot, we're really just saying that this needs to be easy for a user to be able to find. If they found it and used it before, it's important that we don't then make them go and look for things because we've moved it, we put it in a different place, or if people are using keyboard-only controls, that they're able to tab to it and they're not using different numbers of tabs on different pages, that sort of thing. So that's essentially what it is. It's just make sure that your help is easy to find, don't move it around, keep it in the same place and in the same tab order. The next criteria that we are looking at, which is another single A criteria, is redundant entry. And this is essentially about if a user's entered their information once, don't ask them for it again, unless it's absolutely essential that you have to. So the criteria says that information previously entered by or provided to the user that is required to be entered again in the same process is either auto-populated, so you can do it as long as you populate it with the information that you've already collected, or it's available for the user to select, so the user can easily put that in from maybe from a drop-down or something like that. Or if you absolutely have to collect that information again because re-entering the information is essential, or the information is required to ensure the security of the content, or if the previously entered information is no longer valid, then you can ask the user for it again. But in general, those things won't apply. And essentially, if you need to try and think of ways of organizing your data collection from your clients without asking them for the same data more than once. And I think that we've all used a website or registered for something, and we've had to enter our information multiple times. It's very frustrating. And it can be even more frustrating if you have a disability and you find it difficult to fill out forms anyway. And there's multiple disabilities that'll mean that'll be the case. So yeah, make sure you only ask people for information once, unless there is an essential reason for you to ask them to do it again. Okay, this is an easier one to get to grips with. So this is 2.4.11, focus not obscured minimum. And this is a AA conformance criteria. So you can notice there that it says minimum in brackets. That's because the next criteria is enhanced. So there's so when you've got a minimum and enhanced criteria, and there are a couple of them now, that means that the AAA criteria normally has more stringent requirements than the AA criteria. So in this one, we can see a screenshot of a link, but there's a back to top button or control over the top of that. And this one is actually from the W3C website. I did manipulate the page naughtily just so that I could make this happen. It wasn't happening at the native resolution, but when I moved the boundary of the page, I could get it so that the back to top button was over this focus link. Now, under the AA criteria, this is still a pass because we can still see the link. We can get some impression of what it says. We know that there is focus there on the page somewhere. And if we wanted to, we could scroll this page up or down to get to that link. So for AA conformance, this is fine. We can do this. We can obscure it a little bit. We just can't obscure it fully. When we go into 2.4.12, this is the AAA requirement. If we obscure this link in any way, shape, or form, that's a link that gets focus in this way from keyboard focus, then this would fail this criterion. So if you're after AA, this would be okay. If you're after AAA, this would not be okay. This would fail.
We had a question, Grant, about redundant entry. What if the user cleared history and saved details? Cleared history and their saved details.
Yeah, that's a user oh, let me think about that actually. What if the user cleared history and saved details? Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So there'd be no requirement on the third party to store those. Oh, actually, no, there would be a requirement on the third party to store those details. So say, for example, they have stored that and they come along to another page and they have to enter it again. Those things would have been stored by the third party on the server side. So it's down to them to not ask for that information again, or only ask for that information again if it's essential. I think what the who's asking the question here, they're referring to maybe things where people have their own saved details on their like for example, a username or password. If you go to a website where that's where you've got that saved locally, that will populate by itself, and that's not an issue. But this is really about the requirement on the whoever's providing the service to store that information and not ask for it again. So yeah, if the user cleared their history and saved details, that wouldn't make any difference. They still shouldn't be asked for that information again further down the road. If they were to restart the process, of course, then it's valid to ask for that information again. But this is more about asking for that information twice within the same journey. Thank you for the question. So 2.5.7 is dragging movements, and this is a AA conformance criteria. Now, we see in lots more rich content, much more dynamic content on the web today. Dragging is one of those things. So here I've got a picture of Miro. This is just an illustration from their website. If you've never used Miro before, what it is a collaborative online program. You can think of it a little bit like sticking post-it notes on the wall, but you can do that digitally. And within Miro, there's a lot of dragging. So you would take a post-it note, you would drag it to another point of the screen, and you would write on it. Somebody else might pick that up and drag it to another point of place on the screen to kind of sort it and those sorts of things. If you've ever used a Kanban board, that's the same sort of process there. And what this requirement says is that if there is all functionality, well, what wcag says is that all functionality that uses a dragging movement for operation can be achieved by a single pointer without dragging, unless dragging is essential for the functionality is deemed by the user agent and not modified by the author. So in the case of Miro boards, you could definitely argue that dragging is essential for functionality, that this process wouldn't work unless you were able to drag things about on the screen. Now, we can definitely try and look at ways of making that more accessible. In fact, a good friend of mine is working on this with Miro at the moment, trying to make Miro more accessible. They're not really looking at wcag conformance for this perspective. They're looking more to the way the games are worked, collaborative, like massively multiplayer games. The way that they work, and try and apply that to this type of scenario. So that there's a different approach going on there for Miro, kind of as a little aside. But certainly there are going to be exceptions to some of these wcag criteria. Because this dragging functionality for some is absolutely essential. I do have another example on the screen, and this is just a simple reordering screen that we can see for a mobile view here. The same could apply easily for a desktop view as well. And all that would need to happen to reorder these particular items in a list is just to have an up and down button on each of them. And that would allow any user to just click with a single pointer, and that would move things up or down within that list, and there would be no need for dragging. So this criteria doesn't say that you can't have dragging movements, or you can't have dragging functionality. It just says that if you've got dragging functionality, you must find a way, if possible, to allow that to happen using just a single pointer. So that's a single click, or maybe focusing your or putting the focus on a particular item using the tab key and then pressing enter or space to activate that. So with some things like the reordering of the rows in a list, that's quite simple. For other things like Miro and other services like that, that's going to be quite complicated. But because it's essential, this criteria for wcag won't apply. So the next one, this is quite an easy one as well. This is a AA requirement, and this relates to target size. So we're all familiar with carousels. So on the screen here, I've got a carousel, also called sliders as well. And here we have 3 images of different fashion items, and then below that we have 3 tiny little buttons that are meant to control which screen or which item that we're looking at, or which set of products that we're looking at. And typically these buttons are tiny. Now, the target size that wcag now requires is that for pointer inputs to be at least 24 by 24 CSS pixels. And that's actually, a decent size. And this is because lots of people with problems with mobility, or people with tremors, they might find it very difficult to click on a pointer that's very small. These pointers being quite a good example. And they might hit the wrong one. It might cause them to make mistakes. It might cause frustration of not being able to get to the places where they want to get to. So it's a requirement in wcag now under 2.2 that 24 by 24 is a minimum size for any controls. Now, of course, there are always exceptions as well, and I'll read those out. So the exceptions are undersized targets those that are less than 24 by 24 CSS pixels are positioned so that if a 24 CSS pixel diameter circle is centered on the bounding box of each, the circles do not intersect another target or the circle for another undersized target. Now that's wcag speak. It's very detailed, I suppose, but it's quite hard to understand. What it's saying is that if you go in to use a target that's less than 24 by 24, then you can mitigate the chances of someone clicking the wrong target by spacing them out more. But there's got to be at least I guess it's a 12 pixel distance between each of the targets, or that target and any other target, so that they don't accidentally press the wrong one. Also, if you've got equivalence, so the function can be achieved through a different control on the same page that meets that criterion. So let me just switch to the next screen. So here's an example of another slider or a gallery control. And we can see that there are, on the screen, there's a picture of a sports car, and below that there are thumbnails of different other things that you can look at in this gallery. Now we've got those controls at the bottom, the thumbnails that we can click on. But the thing I want to draw attention to is the arrows either side. So these are much larger targets. They can be reached or clicked much more easily than the tiny dots on the previous screen. So if we had a scenario where we were looking at the fashion screens with the tiny little dots at the bottom, but there were also these controls for next and previous sets of slides, then that would meet this criteria. So that would be fine. So what it's really saying is that, if your targets are really too small, as long as you've got some other way of navigating that, that's fine. Inline, the target is in a sentence or its size is otherwise constrained by the line height of non-target text. So that's links in text. Basically, there's no requirement for those. User agent control. So whenever wcag talks about a user agent, it's talking about the browser, essentially, in broad terms, the browser or an assistive technology like a screen reader. So if the size of the target is determined by the user agent or by the browser, and it's not modified by the author, that's kind of a browser or assistive technology issue and nothing to do with anything that we've created. Or if it's essential. So a particular presentation of the target is essential or is legally required for the information being conveyed. So those are the exceptions for wcag 2.5.8 target size minimum AA. And we've got a question here from Salesh. Regarding the dragging movement, online e-commerce apps, there is a price slider that is accessible with a keyboard, but it's difficult to select the range with keyboard and screen reader as you have to press or activate multiple times. So yeah, where we've got a slider, so let's say if I understand you correctly, you're talking to something that's about something like a price slider. So you want a product within a certain range. So maybe at one end of the range it's 0, and at the other end of the range is 250. And you just want to look at products which are in the 0 to £20 or dollars range. That's kind of where I'd be looking for products. I like a bargain. So if you were to do that, normally you'd be dragging these sliders with a mouse. Now there are very good keyboard accessible ways of dragging sliders, but I think the point you raised in Slash is that you have to press or activate something multiple times. So usually you would use the tab key on the keyboard. For those that aren't familiar with how you navigate using a keyboard, it's usually the tab key. That's the one before the shift key, and that will move you through any interactive controls. And then once you've landed on the bottom end of the slider, you'd probably leave that at 0 or 0 if you wanted to leave the price at 0, the bottom end. You'd tab again for the top end, and you would move that around using, it's usually using the arrow keys. So you'd bring that slider down from 250 using the arrow key, and it would come down in increments. So it depends on how the developer set up those increments. It could be coming down by $1 at a time, or it could be coming down by $50 at a time. So there's no requirement for developers to use a particular increment, actually. It would make sense for them to not use just $1, but maybe $50 or $20 to bring that down, so there were less key presses. But as for how many presses need to be pressed, that's for the developer to decide, and there's no requirement for it. I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know, and I'll have another go. Okay, so this is quite a complicated one. This is wcag 3.3.8 accessible authentication. So this is minimum. So again, we've got a minimum, an enhanced version of this requirement. And for AA conformance, which is the minimum, I've got 3 different screenshots. So the first one is of an EE login, where it's asking for email or username. Then it has a next button. Then it has a forgot your password link, or don't have an account, create an account link, and then a cancel link underneath it, which is probably a button. And then we've got reCAPTCHA. So you might be familiar with this if you've registered for nearly anything in the past 10 years. So this is the screen where you'd have to identify traffic lights or bicycles or buses or all sorts of different things. And you've got an image or a set of images, and you would have to click on any of the squares that that in this case show traffic lights. And then below that visual part of it, we can see that there's a refresh and there's an audio symbol, so you can actually listen to these reCAPTCHAs as well, where it will shout out to you different words, and then you'd have to retype these into a text box. And then that's got a verify button on it as well. And then finally, we've got those awful original capture images where you've got squiggly lines written all over letters and numbers, and you've got to retype those into a text field. And thankfully, they are not now allowed by wcag 3.3.8 because this requires you to recognize text, and that's a cognitive function test. So I've used the term there, cognitive function test. That's very important to this particular criteria. So what this criteria says is that we can't test someone's cognitive function. We can test whether they are a genuine user and not a robot. We can test that, and we can test that they are who they say they are, but we can't test their cognitive function. So a cognitive function is something like remembering something, even remembering something like a password, or solving a puzzle. But we are allowed to ask people to recognize objects like traffic lights or buses or taxis and those sorts of things, because that doesn't come under the definition of cognitive function test as defined by wcag. So there are some exceptions to this as well. So if there's another authentication method that does not rely on a cognitive function test, then that's acceptable. If there's a mechanism available to assist the user in completing the cognitive function test, I can't guess what that is, but if there is some way that the user can be helped to pass it, then that's great. If the cognitive function test is to recognize objects, as in the case of recognizing traffic lights, that's okay. Or if the cognitive function is to identify non-text content the user provided to the website. Now, the only example I can think of this is where it was for a bank, I can't remember which one, where I uploaded a picture of my own that was then used, so I could validate that that was me logging in a second time. So it would say, you know, which of these pictures is yours? And then I'd click on the picture that I'd uploaded because I recognized it. So that would be an acceptable way of doing things as well.
I guess another one, Grant, is if you get locked out of your Facebook account, it shows you a couple of pictures of your friends, and I think you have to name them or something like that.
Oh, okay, that's quite good. I haven't had that one, but yeah, that's a really good example. Maybe I'll use that one in future. But yeah, I like that. Good. And then there is a deeper authentication for accessible authentication for AAA, which narrows down what the exceptions are. So it's the same thing. You can't give someone a cognitive function test, such as remembering a password or solving a puzzle, unless that step provides at least one of the following. So either an alternative or a mechanism to assist the user in the cognitive functioning test. Again, I'm not sure what that mechanism might look like, but if you can help the user with it in some way, then that's acceptable as well. So that's mostly all. Well, that is all the new criteria. So if you manage to get through that, you now have a better understanding of what 2.2 new requirements are. And then there is, of course, the last one, which is parsing, which is obsolete and removed. A lot of people would be very happy about that. I said previously, it was quite simple to test, but it kind of is, kind of isn't. So if you run a parsing test on a web page and it's just got an issue, that's fine. Sometimes you run a test on the page and it's got hundreds of issues, and you look at them and not all of them will, that not all of them are going to cause accessibility issues. Like element cannot be child of div. That comes up a lot. But you know that there's generally no consequence for, that code being there. And I think that's largely why it was taken out, because it would throw up so many different errors. I suppose they are errors because it just means that code's not well formed. But these errors didn't really have any impact on accessibility. You could argue that they needed to be there for a code quality reason anyway, and they should, and developers and should always look at the code quality and test that and make sure that it meets standards. But there was a lot of sifting through, so I think that's why it was dropped. And also the argument is that if you have got any of these parsing issues on your page, then you will pick that up with other assistive technology. I'm not sure that's completely true, because sometimes assistive technologies and browsers cheat. So sometimes you'll have some bad code and it'll render perfectly on the screen, or you'll hear it perfectly with the screen reader. But that's only the browser and the screen reader and operating system that you're using for testing. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of the different combinations of other technologies are going to give you the same results. So I would say it's still worth testing this, and we're still going to test it at Dig. But we won't be reporting it anymore. We'll only use it to maybe help identify some potential issues and report those back to the clients. So even if we're not getting an issue, but we get some parsing issues, we'd probably report that back because potentially it won't work for a combination of assistive technologies and browsers and operating systems that we haven't tested on. I can see that we've got a question here. So does this mean that wcag 2.2 will be the new standard? I know a lot of my customers reference 2.1. Yeah, so from October the 5th, it's the new standard. You can start testing 2.2 from today. I think customers over the next few months will start asking for wcag 2.2 or at least testing to the latest standards. And that means that this additional element of testing needs to be accounted for as well. So it means that testing is going to take a little bit longer. But I suppose that's a cost that your customers need to be aware of as well. It means that you may need to raise your prices slightly just to make sure that you're accounting for the additional testing in this. Just to let you know that Hugger does have these test criteria in them now. We are still in the process of writing guidance for these. But that kind of follows on to Tara's question. Will in-browser tools such as Axe and Wave still pick up those parsing errors? Oh, yes. I think they will. So where you've got something like a duplicate ID, it almost certainly will, because that will be covered by different another criteria. So I know that it will pick up something like a duplicate ID, which is the big one that we always looking for with passing errors. If you've got a duplicate ID, there's definitely something wrong there. And what a duplicate ID is, it's where you've got two form fields. One says first name, one says last name. The computer identifies those by using their ID. So the ID for first name might be F name, the ID for last name might be L name, and if they both got the same ID, F name and F name, then a screen reader won't know which label they're reading for those those form fields, but they will try to guess. And it might guess wrong, because it has to guess, because there's nothing else it can really do with that. I say has to guess. I'm not sure that they all guess, but certainly the ones that we test with do try to guess, and often they get it wrong because the ID is giving them, it isn't giving them enough information. So yes, Tara, I think that certain aspects of passing will be picked up by those tools, but they'll probably be much more refined than just a passing test. So yeah, I think that they're in a sense more reliable now, because they're only looking for the key things that are going to cause problems rather than looking for everything. Okay, so that's it. That is all the criteria. I hope that wasn't too stressful or stretched your minds too much, but that's essentially it. I would encourage you all to go and look at the criteria yourselves as well, read them, because there's a lot of information with these different criteria. There's understanding documents, there's how to meet documents, and it's well worth going and familiarizing yourselves with those particularly. If you're a tester, if you're an accessibility tester, you need to know how to test these thoroughly. I've given you an overview. There is a little bit more to learn than what we've discussed. So definitely go and do that. Also, if you're in any other role in web design or development, this is something that you need to look at. And someone's asking me what microphone I'm using. It's the microphone on my MacBook. I'm not using any external mic, but that is good feedback. Thank you very much. I'll continue to use it. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for coming and listening to this presentation. I really hope that it was useful. If you want to get in touch, you can email me at grant@diginclusion.com, or go to diginclusion.com to learn out more about what we do. And if you're in testing, or if you're running a testing team, then go to hugger.app, that's hugr.app, and check that out. You might find it useful. You might find that it accelerates or improves testing accuracy, and that's always a good thing.